Marcus Bennett drove slowly through the quiet streets of Evergreen, Virginia. The small town, with its old brick buildings and tree-lined roads, seemed peaceful in the evening light. Marcus had just finished his work in a nearby city and was heading to Washington, D.C. As a CIA agent for 12 years, he was used to blending in wherever he went. His dark blue sedan was nothing special. That was the point. In his line of work, standing out was dangerous. Marcus kept to the speed limit and stopped at every sign. His job had taught him to follow rules carefully, especially in small towns where outsiders got noticed. It was just past 8:30 p.m. when flashing blue and red lights appeared in his mirror. Marcus checked his speed, exactly 35 miles per hour in a 35 zone. He hadn't broken any laws. Still, he pulled over right away, keeping both hands visible on the steering wheel. Two white officers approached, one on each side of his car. The taller one, whose nameplate read Wilson, tapped on the driver's window with his flashlight. "License and registration," Officer Wilson said when Marcus lowered the window. His voice was hard, his face showing no emotion. "May I ask why I've been stopped, officer?" Marcus asked politely. "You ran a stop sign back there," Wilson said, though Marcus knew this wasn't true. He had stopped completely at every intersection. "I'm sorry, but I'm certain I came to a complete stop at every sign," Marcus replied calmly. Officer Wilson's partner, a shorter man with Harmon on his badge, shined his flashlight around the inside of Marcus's car. "Just give me your license," Wilson demanded, his tone growing sharper. Marcus slowly reached for his wallet. "I'm reaching for my ID now," he said clearly, movements deliberate and careful. As he handed over his license and registration, Marcus noticed Wilson and Harmon exchange a look. Something wasn't right about this stop. "Step out of the vehicle, sir," Wilson ordered after looking at Marcus's ID. "May I ask why?" Marcus questioned. "Just step out of the car now," Wilson repeated, his hand moving to rest on his gun. Marcus obeyed, stepping out slowly. The night air felt suddenly cold. "We've had reports of drug trafficking in the area," Harmon explained, though his eyes didn't meet Marcus's. "Mind if we search your vehicle?" "I do mind, actually," Marcus said firmly. "I don't consent to any searches." Wilson's face hardened. "Look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way." Before Marcus could respond, Harmon called out, "Got probable cause, Jim. I can see something under the seat from here." Marcus knew this was a lie. There was nothing under his seat except perhaps a map. But he also knew arguing would only make things worse. "Sir, turn around and put your hands behind your back," Wilson ordered. "On what grounds am I being detained?" Marcus asked, still calm despite the rising tension. Instead of answering, Wilson grabbed Marcus's arm and spun him around, pushing him against the car. Cold handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Marcus watched helplessly as Harmon searched his car. When the officer reached the trunk and found the sealed diplomatic pouch, standard for transporting sensitive CIA documents, his expression changed. "What's this?" Harmon asked, holding up the black pouch with official seals. "That's government property," Marcus explained. "It's sealed and confidential." Wilson laughed. "Sure it is. Bet that's what all you dealers say now." As they placed him in the back of the police car, Marcus kept silent, his mind working. He noticed Wilson slip something into the pouch when he thought no one was looking. Marcus understood immediately what was happening. They were framing him, and they had no idea who they were really dealing with. The police station in Evergreen was small, with faded walls and flickering lights. Marcus sat handcuffed to a metal chair in the interview room, his face calm despite the situation. His CIA training had prepared him for much worse than this. Officer Wilson entered, dropping a folder on the table. His partner Harmon stood by the door, arms crossed. "So, Mr. Bennett," Wilson said, opening the folder. "Want to tell us about the drugs we found in your car?" "There were no drugs in my car," Marcus replied evenly. "Whatever you found was placed there after you stopped me." Wilson laughed, the sound sharp and cold. "That's what they all say, but we have evidence right here." He slid a photo across the table showing the diplomatic pouch, now open, with a small bag of white powder inside. Marcus looked at the picture without reacting. His mind was working fast, recording every detail of this encounter. The timestamp on the photo, the angle of the lighting, the position of Wilson's hand. Things most people would miss, but that a trained CIA operative would notice. "I'd like to make my phone call now," Marcus said. In due time, Wilson replied, "First, let's talk about these drugs." For the next hour, Wilson and Harmon took turns questioning Marcus. They tried to intimidate him with threats of long prison sentences. They offered deals if he would name his suppliers. Through it all, Marcus remained silent, watching them closely. When they left him alone, Marcus used the time to listen to conversations in the hallway. He heard Wilson talking to someone named Davis about making the charges stick and teaching another one a lesson. Marcus memorized every word. Later that night, a third officer came to take Marcus's fingerprints. This man, Officer Reynolds, seemed uncomfortable with the situation. When Wilson wasn't looking, Reynolds whispered, "This isn't right," before quickly walking away. Marcus now knew there were divisions within the department. This could be useful. At midnight, they finally allowed Marcus his phone call. Instead of calling his CIA handler directly, which might expose his identity, he called Jessica Ramirez, a local attorney whose name he had seen on a billboard during the drive into town. "This is Jessica Ramirez," a tired voice answered. "Ms. Ramirez, my name is Marcus Bennett. I've been arrested in Evergreen on false drug charges. I need legal representation immediately." "It's midnight, Mr. Bennett," she said, but Marcus could hear her already reaching for a pen. "What exactly happened?" "I was pulled over for allegedly running a stop sign. The officers planted evidence in my car. They're trying to frame me." There was a pause. "That's a serious accusation." "I know, and I can prove it," Marcus said confidently. "Will you take my case?" After a moment, she agreed to meet him the next morning. Back in his cell, Marcus lay on the thin mattress, eyes closed but mind alert. He was organizing information. Wilson and Harmon's badge numbers, the names he'd overheard, the exact timeline of events. He had noticed a pattern in how they handled his case, the practiced way they planted evidence, the coordinated questioning. This wasn't their first time framing someone. What the officers didn't realize was that Marcus wasn't just any victim. His entire career had been built on noticing details others missed. Every word they said, every procedure they skipped, every right they violated, he documented it all in his memory. Meanwhile, at the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, a red flag had appeared in the system. Agent Marcus Bennett had missed his scheduled check-in. Protocol dictated that they wait 24 hours before taking action, but his handler, Agent Sarah Chen, felt uneasy. Something was wrong. As dawn approached, Marcus had a plan forming. The officers thought they had caught an ordinary black man they could easily frame. Instead, they had captured a highly trained CIA operative who was now gathering evidence against them with every passing hour. The trap they thought they had set for Marcus was slowly becoming their own. The morning sun streamed through the narrow window of Marcus's cell. He had slept little, his mind piecing together the puzzle of the situation. He'd heard keys jingling as a guard approached. "Bennett, your lawyer's here," the officer said, unlocking the cell door. In the meeting room, Jessica Ramirez waited. She was younger than Marcus had expected, maybe early 30s, with intense dark eyes and a professional Navy suit. Files were spread before her on the table. "Mr. Bennett," she said, standing to shake his hand. "I've reviewed the initial report. They're charging you with possession with intent to distribute. Class 2 felony in Virginia." Marcus nodded, taking a seat. "They planted those drugs. I need you to understand that." Jessica's expression remained neutral. "I've heard that claim before. What makes your case different?" "Look into Officer Wilson and Officer Harmon," Marcus said quietly. "This isn't random. Check their arrest records. Focus on traffic stops involving black men in the last year." Jessica raised an eyebrow but made a note. "Anything else I should know about you, Mr. Bennett?" Marcus considered his words carefully. "I work for the federal government. That's all I can say right now." "Which agency?" she pressed. "I can't disclose that yet," Marcus replied. "But it's why they found a diplomatic pouch in my car. It's standard for transporting sensitive documents." Jessica's eyes widened slightly. She wrote something down, then glanced at the camera in the corner of the room. "We should be careful what we discuss here," she said softly. Meanwhile, at CIA headquarters, Sarah Chen was growing increasingly concerned. Marcus had now been out of contact for 18 hours. She approached her supervisor, Deputy Director Eleanor Walsh, a stern woman with silver hair and 30 years of agency experience. "We've had no check-in from Bennett," Sarah reported. "His tracking device went offline near Evergreen, Virginia." Eleanor frowned. "That's unusual for him. He's one of our most reliable agents." "Should we activate retrieval protocol?" Sarah asked. "Not yet," Eleanor decided. "First, let's quietly check arrest records and hospital admissions in that area. No direct contact that might compromise him." Back in Evergreen, Police Chief Robert Davis sat in his office reviewing Wilson's report on Marcus's arrest. Davis was a heavyset man with thinning hair and 25 years on the force. He had concerns. "Another drug arrest, Wilson?" he asked as Officer Wilson entered. "That's your fourth this month." Wilson smiled. "Just doing my job, Chief. Keeping Evergreen safe." Davis wasn't convinced. "These numbers are starting to look suspicious. The county attorney might start asking questions." "Let him," Wilson replied confidently. "Our paperwork is always perfect." What neither man knew was that Wilson's perfect paperwork was hiding a dark operation. For 2 years, Wilson had led a small group of officers who targeted black drivers passing through Evergreen. They planted evidence, falsified reports, and secured convictions that boosted their statistics and led to promotions and bonuses. Marcus was their 12th target this year, but unlike the others, mostly working-class men who couldn't afford good lawyers or fight the system, Marcus had resources and training they couldn't imagine. By afternoon, Jessica had done her research. She arrived for a second meeting with Marcus, her expression grim but determined. "I found something," she said, keeping her voice low. "In the past 18 months, Wilson and Harmon have arrested 11 black men during traffic stops, all charged with drug possession, all convicted or took plea deals." Marcus nodded. "And I'm number 12. "There's more," Jessica continued. "Officer Reynolds, the younger one, recently filed a confidential complaint about Wilson's conduct during traffic stops. It was buried by someone in the department." "Chief Davis," Marcus suggested. Jessica looked surprised. "How would you know that?" "Just a guess," Marcus said, though it wasn't. He had heard Davis's name mentioned repeatedly during his time in the cell. As they talked, a CIA analyst 300 miles away had just discovered Marcus's name in Evergreen's arrest database. Within minutes, the information reached Eleanor Walsh's desk. "We found him," she told Sarah Chen. "But this complicates things. We need to extract him without exposing agency operations." Eleanor picked up a secure phone. "Get me the Department of Justice. We're going to need specialized help on this one." In Evergreen, unaware of the forces now moving into position, Officers Wilson and Harmon continued building their case against Marcus, blind to the storm that was about to break over them. Jessica Ramirez spread files across her small office desk late into the night. Pictures of Marcus's car, copies of the police report, and statistics on Evergreen's traffic stops covered every inch of space. Something about this case had gotten under her skin. Maybe it was the calm way Marcus spoke, so different from her usual panicked clients. Her phone rang, breaking her concentration. "Jessica, it's Mike from the clerk's office," said the voice on the other end. "I pulled those records you asked for. Found something weird." "I'm listening," Jessica said, grabbing a notepad. "Those traffic stops you asked about, the dash cam footage is missing for 9 of them. Department claims equipment failure. 9 times in 18 months, always with Wilson and Harmon." Jessica's pulse quickened. "And my clients stop. Missing 2. More equipment failure." After hanging up, Jessica stared at her notes. This was beyond coincidence. She needed more, but traditional channels wouldn't be enough. She called an old college friend who now worked at the Evergreen Chronicle. "Alicia, I need a favor," she said when her friend answered. "Off the record." The next morning, Jessica visited Marcus again. He looked surprisingly well rested despite his surroundings. "The preliminary hearing is tomorrow," she told him. "They're pushing this case fast. Too fast." Marcus nodded. "They want me in the system before anyone looks too closely." "I've been digging," Jessica said, lowering her voice. All the dash cam footage from your arrest is mysteriously missing, and you're not the first. I expected that, Marcus replied, but they made mistakes. People always do. Jessica studied her client carefully. Who are you really, Mr. Bennett? No ordinary government employee stays this calm in jail. Marcus offered a small smile. Let's focus on the case. Have you looked into Officer Wilson's financial situation? Jessica blinked, surprised by the change in subject. No? Why? Just a hunch, Marcus said. Police officers make around $50,000 a year in a town this size. See if he's living beyond his means. As Jessica left the jail, she noticed a black sedan with tinted windows parked across the street. A woman in a dark suit sat inside, watching the building. When Jessica looked directly at her, the woman drove away. At the CIA headquarters, Eleanor Walsh convened a special team in a secure conference room. Bennett's preliminary hearing is tomorrow, she informed the group. We need to intervene without compromising his cover or our operations. Direct extraction, suggested a tactical specialist. Eleanor shook her head. Too visible, we need something subtler. Sarah Chen spoke up. What about Jason Kendrick? He's a justice now, has the clearance, and could show up as a federal prosecutor interested in the case. Eleanor considered this. Get him on the phone, and prepare a briefing package with only what he needs to know. Back in Evergreen, Officer Reynolds sat in his car outside the police station, wrestling with his conscience. He had watched Wilson and Harmon cross lines too many times. The complaint he'd filed had been buried, and now another man's life would be ruined. He made a decision, pulling out his personal phone and dialing a number he'd found in the local paper. Law Offices of Jessica Ramirez, a voice answered. My name is Brian Reynolds, he said quietly. I'm an officer with Evergreen PD. We need to talk about Marcus Bennett's case. Across town, Wilson and Harmon met with Chief Davis in a back room of Joe's diner where they wouldn't be overheard. The lawyer's asking questions, Wilson said, looking concerned for the first time, about our other cases. Davis frowned. Stick to the script. The evidence is solid. We've done this before. Something's different this time, Harmon replied, fidgeting with his coffee cup. Bennett doesn't act like our usual suspects. It's like he's waiting for something. He's just some government clerk who thinks he's important, Davis dismissed. The judge will see a black man with drugs in his car, same as always. None of them noticed the waitress lingering near their table, listening carefully. When she returned to the kitchen, she sent a quick text to Alicia at the Chronicle. Got something. Meet me after my shift. That evening, Jessica compiled everything she had gathered. Financial records showing Wilson's unexplained cash deposits, statistics showing racial disparities in Evergreen's drug arrests, and notes from her meeting with Officer Reynolds. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. As darkness fell, Jessica's office phone rang again. Ms. Ramirez? A deep voice asked. This is Jason Kendrick from the Department of Justice. We need to discuss your client, Marcus Bennett. This conversation is classified. Jessica's hand tightened on the receiver. The resistance was growing stronger. The Department of Justice office in Washington, D.C. buzzed with activity despite the late hour. Jason Kendrick, a tall man with serious eyes and graying temples, studied the file marked "Classified" that had been delivered by special courier. As a former CIA legal counsel now working for the DOJ, he understood the delicate nature of the situation. How did one of our operatives end up in a county jail on drug charges? He asked Sarah Chen, who sat across from him. Wrong place, wrong time, Sarah replied. But we believe there's more to it. These officers have a pattern of targeting black men passing through their jurisdiction. Jason nodded grimly. And Bennett was in the wrong skin at the wrong time. Exactly, Sarah said. Deputy Director Walsh wants this handled quietly. We can't expose Bennett's identity or current operations. We can't leave him there either. Jason closed the file. I'll fly to Evergreen tonight. Get me everything you have on these officers and the local judge. Meanwhile, in a small motel room outside Evergreen, 2 CIA analysts worked with equipment that would impress most FBI technology teams. They had been deployed as part of the agency's response team, tasked with gathering intelligence on the officers who had arrested Marcus. Look at this, said Analyst Lopez, pointing to her screen. Officer Wilson's bank records show cash deposits of $2,000 to $5,000 every month for the past 2 years, always just under the reporting threshold. Her partner, analyst Morris, looked up from his own computer, and I found connections between Chief Davis and Judge Hamilton, who will be presiding over Bennett's hearing. They own property together through a shell company. Lopez added this information to their growing file. We need to get this to Kendrick before morning. Across town, Jessica Ramirez couldn't sleep. The call from the Justice Department had left her with more questions than answers. Why would the DOJ care about a simple drug case in a small town? She reviewed her notes from her conversation with Officer Reynolds again. Wilson and Harmon always volunteer for highway patrol, Reynolds had told her. They target out-of-state plates, especially if the driver is black. They call it phishing. Jessica's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Check your email. Be careful who sees this. The message deleted itself seconds later. She opened her laptop to find an email containing a video file with no text. The video showed Officer Wilson talking to another officer behind the police station 3 months ago. It's easy money, Wilson was saying. We plant a little evidence, they take a plea deal, and the department gets another drug bust on the books. Chief gives us a bonus, everybody wins. Jessica's hands trembled as she saved the file to an encrypted drive. This was the evidence she needed. But who had sent it? At the jail, Marcus lay awake, calculating timing and probabilities. By now, the agency would have located him and initiated standard protocols. He estimated a 70% chance they would work through legal channels rather than attempt extraction. Either way, he needed to maintain his cover and continue gathering evidence against Wilson and his team. A guard walked past his cell doing night checks. Big day tomorrow, Bennett, he said with a smirk. Judge Hamilton doesn't go easy on drug dealers. Marcus said nothing but filed away the information. The guard's tone suggested the outcome was predetermined. One more piece of evidence for the larger pattern. At 6 a.m., as dawn broke over Evergreen, 5 significant events occurred almost simultaneously. Jason Kendrick's government plane landed at the regional airport. Officer Reynolds left an envelope of evidence at Jessica's office door. The CIA analysts completed their report linking Wilson, Harmon, and Chief Davis to 12 false arrests and over $200,000 in unexplained income. Alicia at the Chronicle received photographs from the waitress showing Chief Davis passing money to Wilson at the diner. And Judge Hamilton received a phone call from an old law school friend now working at the Justice Department, warning him that his courtroom would be under unusual scrutiny today. By 7 a.m., Jessica arrived at her office to find both the envelope from Reynolds and a formal notice that Jason Kendrick from the Department of Justice would be observing today's hearing. The small-town conspiracy that had functioned unchallenged for years was about to face forces it couldn't have imagined. Marcus, still in his cell, prepared for court, his face revealing nothing of the invisible machinery now in motion to ensure justice would finally come to Evergreen. The Evergreen County Courthouse stood like a small Greek temple in the town square, its white columns gleaming in the morning sun. Inside, Courtroom 3 was filling with the usual morning crowd, clerks, lawyers, defendants, and a few curious locals. Marcus Bennett sat at the defense table in a clean but wrinkled suit provided by Jessica. His handcuffs had been removed, but a bailiff stood close behind him. Marcus's face remained calm, his eyes taking in every detail of the room. Jessica arranged her files, trying to hide her nervousness. Last night's discoveries had changed everything, but she still didn't know if it would be enough. She noticed Officer Wilson and Harmon sitting confidently in the front row, Chief Davis beside them. All rise for the Honorable Judge Richard Hamilton, the bailiff called. Judge Hamilton entered, a tall man with silver hair and cold eyes. As he took his seat, Jessica noticed he seemed less confident than usual, his gaze darting around the courtroom. Case number 2025 CR 742, State vs. Bennett, the clerk announced. Just then, the courtroom doors opened. A man in an expensive suit entered, followed by 2 others carrying briefcases. The newcomer walked directly to the front. Your Honor, Jason Kendrick, Department of Justice, he announced, showing his credentials. The federal government has an interest in these proceedings. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Judge Hamilton's face paled slightly. Mr. Kendrick, This is a simple drug case. What interest does the DOJ have here? Hamilton asked. That's a matter of national security, Your Honor, Kendrick replied. I request a brief private conference in your chambers with counsel before we proceed. Judge Hamilton hesitated, then nodded. Very well. Court will take a 15-minute recess. In the judge's chambers, Jessica found herself surrounded by federal officials. Jason Kendrick spoke in low, serious tones while showing Judge Hamilton documents with official seals. So you understand the situation? Kendrick concluded. The judge's face had lost all color. I had no idea who the defendant was. We're not here to expose Mr. Bennett's identity, Kendrick clarified. But justice must be served. There appeared to be serious issues with this arrest and the officers involved. When court resumed, the atmosphere had changed completely. Judge Hamilton's usual confidence was gone. Officer Wilson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sensing something had changed. The court will now hear preliminary arguments, Judge Hamilton announced. The prosecutor, a young man named Richard Davis, Chief Davis's nephew, stood first. Your Honor, this is straightforward. The officers found illegal substances in the defendant's vehicle during a routine traffic stop. The state requests the case proceed to trial. Ms. Ramirez? The judge asked. Jessica rose, feeling all eyes on her. Your Honor, we move for immediate dismissal of all charges. The evidence against my client was planted by Officers Wilson and Harmon as part of a systematic pattern of false arrests targeting black men in this jurisdiction. Officer Wilson jumped to his feet. That's a lie. Sit down, officer, Judge Hamilton ordered sharply. Jessica continued. We have evidence showing that dashcam footage from my client's arrest was deliberately deleted. We have testimony from another officer stating that Wilson and Harmon regularly plant evidence. And we have financial records showing unexplained cash deposits to Officer Wilson's accounts following these arrests. The prosecutor looked stunned. Your Honor, this is the first we're hearing of these allegations. Then perhaps you should investigate your own police department more carefully, Jessica replied. I'd like to call Officer Wilson to the stand for questioning. Wilson looked to Chief Davis, who seemed equally surprised by the turn of events. Kendrick watched silently from his seat near the judge. The witness will take the stand, Judge Hamilton ordered. As Wilson walked to the witness box, Marcus caught Jessica's eye and gave a slight nod. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The trap was about to close. Officer Wilson, Jessica began, opening a folder of documents. Can you explain why you pulled over Mr. Bennett on the night of March 3rd? Wilson straightened his uniform. He ran a stop sign at Maple and 5th. Jessica smiled. Interesting, since there is no stop sign at that intersection. There never has been. The courtroom erupted in whispers as Wilson's face turned red. The first crack in the frame-up had appeared, and everyone could see it. I meant the stop sign at Maple and 4th, he corrected himself, avoiding Jessica's eyes. Officer Wilson, are you changing your testimony? Jessica asked, her voice steady. Because in your police report, you clearly wrote Maple and 5th. Wilson glanced at Chief Davis, who stared back with a warning look. It was a simple mistake in the report, Wilson replied. Jessica nodded, then retrieved a large map of Evergreen from her files. She unfolded it on the evidence table where everyone could see. For the record, she said, pointing to the map, there is no intersection of Maple and 5th Streets in Evergreen. Maple ends at 4th Street. Whispers spread through the courtroom. Judge Hamilton banged his gavel once for silence. Ms. Ramirez, please continue, the judge instructed, his tone noticeably cooler toward the officer. Jessica walked to her table and picked up a folder. Officer Wilson, after stopping my client, you claim you saw drugs in plain view in his car. Is that correct? Yes, Wilson answered firmly. There was a suspicious package visible on the back seat. Yet in your original radio call for backup, which dispatch recorded, you said, and I quote, no visible contraband, requesting permission to search vehicle. Why the contradiction? Wilson's face darkened. I don't recall saying that. Jessica smiled slightly. Perhaps this will refresh your memory. She nodded to the court clerk, who played an audio recording. Wilson's voice filled the courtroom. Unit 34 to dispatch. Subject pulled over at Maple and 4th. No visible contraband, requesting permission to search vehicle. The courtroom erupted again. Even the prosecutor looked shocked. Your Honor, Jessica continued, I have 11 similar cases where officers Wilson and Harmon followed this exact pattern. False traffic stops, contradictory reports, and mysteriously appearing evidence. Jason Kendrick stood. Your Honor, the Department of Justice has been investigating a pattern of civil rights violations in Evergreen. We believe this case fits that pattern. Chief Davis suddenly stood up. This is outrageous. My officers are being slandered. Sit down, Chief Davis, Judge Hamilton ordered sharply. Marcus remained perfectly still at the defense table, his expression unchanged, but inside he felt satisfaction seeing the frame-up collapse. Jessica walked closer to Wilson. Officer, where did you find the diplomatic pouch in Mr. Bennett's car? In the trunk, Wilson answered. And did you open it at the scene? Yes, we found drugs inside. Jessica nodded thoughtfully. Interesting, because diplomatic pouches are sealed with special tamper-evident technology. Opening one without authorization is actually a federal offense. Wilson paled. I didn't know what it was. It has diplomatic materials, do not OPN printed on both sides, Jessica countered, showing photographs to the court. Just then, the courtroom doors opened. A woman in a dark suit entered and handed a note to Jason Kendrick, who read it quickly. Your Honor, Kendrick announced, we have just received forensic results from the FBI lab. The fingerprints on the drug package allegedly found in Mr. Bennett's diplomatic pouch belong exclusively to Officers Wilson and Harmon. Mr. Bennett's prints are not on the package at all. The courtroom fell completely silent. Furthermore, Kendrick continued, the serial numbers on the cash found in Officer Wilson's home safe yesterday match bills marked by the FBI in a separate investigation. Officer Harmon jumped up from his seat. Wilson, they know everything. This was your idea, not mine. Shut up, you idiot, Wilson shouted back. Judge Hamilton banged his gavel repeatedly. Order. Order in this court. When the room quieted, Jessica played her final card. Your Honor, my client had reason to believe he might be targeted. As a government employee familiar with certain protocols, he activated a recording device when he was first pulled over. She placed a small device on the evidence table and pressed play. The voices of Wilson and Harmon filled the room. This one's perfect. Out-of-state plates. Well-dressed black guy. Plant the package deep in that fancy pouch. Make it look good. Davis will make sure Hamilton keeps it quiet, like always. Chief Davis stood up and rushed for the door, but 2 federal agents blocked his way. Judge Hamilton's face had turned to stone. This case is dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Bennett, you are free to go. Officers Wilson and Harmon, you are remanded into federal custody pending charges of evidence tampering, false arrest, and civil rights violations. As the officers were handcuffed, Marcus finally allowed himself a small smile. Justice was being served, though few people in the room understood the full extent of what had really happened. 6 months after the dramatic courtroom revelation, Marcus Bennett sat at a small cafe in Washington, D.C. He wore casual clothes, jeans, and a dark blue sweater, looking nothing like a man who had sparked a revolution in a small Virginia town. Across from him sat Jessica Ramirez, now heading a special civil rights task force created by the Justice Department. She had moved to D.C. 3 months ago after receiving the offer directly from the Attorney General. I still can't believe how everything changed, Jessica said, stirring her coffee. One case broke open decades of corruption. Marcus nodded. Sometimes it takes just one thread to unravel the whole sweater. The aftermath of the Evergreen case had been swift and far-reaching. Officers Wilson and Harmon were now serving 10-year federal sentences for civil rights violations and evidence tampering. Chief Davis had taken a plea deal, providing evidence against Judge Hamilton and 5 other officers involved in the scheme. The investigation revealed that over 50 black men had been falsely imprisoned over the past 5 years alone. What happened to Officer Reynolds? Marcus asked. He's the new interim police chief, Jessica replied with a smile. The town council asked him to rebuild the department from the ground up. He's implementing all the reforms we recommended. Body cameras that can't be turned off, civilian oversight board, community engagement programs. Good, Marcus said simply. Jessica looked at him carefully. You know, I still don't know exactly who you are. The Justice Department sealed your records. All I know is that you're not just a government employee like you claimed. Marcus smiled. Let's just say I work in information gathering. CIA, Jessica guessed, lowering her voice. Marcus's expression revealed nothing. I'm grateful for what you did, Jessica. Many lawyers would have taken the easy path and advised me to accept a plea deal. Jessica shook her head. I became a lawyer to fight injustice. I just never expected to uncover something so big in a small town like Evergreen. The conversation was interrupted when Jessica's phone buzzed. She checked the message and looked up with bright eyes. The governor just signed the Bennett Act, she announced. It's official. Marcus nodded with satisfaction. Bennett Act, made without his permission but with his quiet approval, required all police departments in Virginia to implement anti-bias training, independent review of traffic stop patterns, and automatic investigation of officers with unusually high arrest rates for minorities. 12 other states are considering similar laws, Jessica added. This is changing police work across the country. What Jessica didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that Marcus had been working on a classified operation tracking domestic terrorism when he was arrested. His mission had been temporarily derailed, but the CIA had used the opportunity to clean up a corrupt police department. It wasn't the original mission, but it served the greater good of protecting American citizens from those who abused their power. I have to go, Marcus said, checking his watch. I have a meeting across town. Jessica stood and shook his hand. Will I see you again? Perhaps, Marcus replied with a small smile. Life is full of surprises. As Marcus walked away, his phone vibrated with a message from Sarah Chen. New assignment. Briefing at 1400 hours. He would continue his work protecting the country from threats both foreign and domestic. Most people would never know his name or what he did, but in Evergreen, Virginia, his legacy lived on. That evening, in Evergreen, Officer Brian Reynolds walked through the police station he now led. New officers were being trained. Community members sat on advisory boards. Trust was slowly being rebuilt. On his desk sat a small framed newspaper clipping with the headline, Justice Prevails. How one man's case changed everything. Reynolds looked at the grainy photo of Marcus leaving the courthouse. Few people understood the true impact of what had happened that day. A system that had seemed unbreakable had been exposed and reformed. In the shadows of American justice, a single point of light had cut through darkness, and though Marcus Bennett had disappeared back into his secret world, the truth he had helped reveal continued to shine, illuminating a path toward a more just system for everyone.